The sun had stopped being merciful 3 hours ago. Evelyn Mercer's boots dragged through sand that felt like it was trying to pull her down into hell itself. Her dress clung to her body, soaked through with sweat that had long since stopped cooling her skin. The canteen at her hip had been empty since dawn, and the sun, that relentless, hateful sun, sat fat and red on the horizon like it was mocking her for still being alive. She should have died yesterday, maybe the day before. Time had stopped meaning much after the third day of walking. The deed tucked inside her bodice felt heavier than it should have. A piece of paper that promised land in a place called Black Hollow, a settlement her late husband had bought sight unseen with money they didn't have, and dreams that collapsed the moment his heart gave out on a train platform in Missouri. Thomas had died believing that paper meant something. Evelyn had buried him believing it too. Now, 6 weeks later and 1,000 miles west, she was starting to think the whole thing had been a lie from the start. Black Hollow probably didn't even exist. Just another name on a map designed to steal money from desperate people trying to escape their failures back east. But she kept walking anyway, because going back meant admitting she'd lost everything for nothing. The landscape around her looked like something that hated living things. Red rocks stretched in every direction, carved into shapes that seemed deliberately hostile. Jagged cliffs, deep crevasses, towers of stone that cast shadows in all the wrong places. Nothing green, nothing soft. Just rock, sand, and heat that made the air shimmer like water. Evelyn stopped walking and closed her eyes. For a moment, just one single moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to simply sit down and not get back up. To let the desert take her the way it had taken so many others. Quick, quiet, final. No more walking, no more heat, no more carrying the weight of promises made to a dead man. She opened her eyes. "Not today," she whispered to the empty desert. Her voice came out cracked and raw. "Not today." She started walking again. The sun touched the horizon, and the temperature dropped so fast it felt like the world was punishing her in a new way. Desert cold wasn't like winter back east. It didn't creep in slow and polite. It arrived all at once, sharp and vicious, turning sweat-soaked clothes into something that clung to her skin like ice. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself and kept moving, because stopping now meant freezing to death instead of dying from heat, and she'd be damned if she let this place choose how she went out. That's when she heard the horse. She stopped, every muscle in her body tensing. Out here, a horse meant a person, and a person could mean help, or it could mean something much worse. The frontier didn't care much for women traveling alone. She'd learned that lesson hard in the town where she'd bought her last supplies. Learned it from the way men looked at her, the way they smiled with too many teeth, the way the shopkeeper had suggested she find herself a protector before heading out alone. She'd left that town at dawn and hadn't regretted it once. The sound of hooves grew closer, slow and deliberate. Not the frantic pace of someone being chased or the cautious approach of someone hunting. Just steady, confident. Evelyn's hand went to the small knife tucked in her boot, the only weapon she had, and a pathetic one at that. But it was something. The rider appeared from behind a massive boulder, silhouetted against the dying light. Man-shaped, broad-shouldered. He sat his horse like someone who'd been born in the saddle, relaxed in a way that suggested he didn't consider the desert a threat. He stopped about 20 feet away, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke. "You lost, ma'am?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Western accent, but not the theatrical kind she'd heard from men trying to sound tougher than they were. This was just how he talked. Evelyn straightened her spine, trying to look less like a woman who'd been ready to die 5 minutes ago, and more like someone who had a plan. "I'm heading to Black Hollow," she said, following the trail markers. "There aren't any trail markers to Black Hollow." "Then I'm following the wrong trail markers." Something that might have been amusement flickered across the man's face, though it was hard to tell in the fading light. He nudged his horse forward a few steps, and Evelyn forced herself not to step back. The movement brought him close enough that she could actually see him now. Somewhere in his 30s, she guessed. Weathered face that had seen too much sun and not enough softness. Dark hair, dark eyes, jaw covered in several days of stubble. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher. Worn denim, a leather vest, a hat that had seen better years. Nothing about him screamed danger, but nothing about him suggested safety either. Black Hollow's been abandoned for 3 years, he said. Nothing there but collapsed buildings and graves. Evelyn's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression flat. That's so. That's so. Well, she swallowed against the dryness in her throat. I appreciate the information. She started walking again, moving past him at an angle that kept him in her peripheral vision. If he was going to try something, she wanted to see it coming. Where are you planning on going now? He called after her. Forward? Forward where? Just forward. Ma'am, it's almost dark. You got no water, no supplies I can see, and no idea where you're headed. Forward's just going to get you killed. Evelyn stopped but didn't turn around. I've been managing fine so far. Have you? It wasn't a question. She heard him dismount. The creak of leather, the soft thud of boots hitting sand, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up behind her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she'd learned a long time ago that running from men like this just made things worse. Predators chased what ran, so she stood still and waited, her hand still close to the knife in her boot. He moved around to face her, and this close, she could see the way he was looking at her, not with hunger or threat, but with something that looked almost like concern. It confused her more than aggression would have. Name's Cole Bennett, he said. I've got a ranch about 8 miles northeast of here, outside a town called Dry Creek. I can offer you water, a meal, and a place to sleep for the night. Come morning, you can decide what you want to do next. And what do you want in return? The question came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't take it back. Men didn't offer things for free. Not out here. Something shifted in Cole's expression. A flash of understanding, maybe even respect. Nothing, he said quietly. I want nothing in return. Everyone wants something. Not from you, I don't. They stared at each other in the failing light. Evelyn tried to read his face, tried to find the lie or the trap or the angle, but all she saw was exhaustion that matched her own. A different kind, maybe, but just as deep. She had 3 choices: accept his offer, refuse and keep walking into the dark, or try to kill him with a 3-inch blade and take his horse. The third option was stupid. The second option was suicide. That left the first. One night, Evelyn said, then I'm gone. One night, Cole agreed. He walked back to his horse, and for a brief, stupid moment, Evelyn thought he might just ride off and leave her there. But instead, he grabbed something from his saddlebag and tossed it to her. She caught it reflexively. A canteen, full. Drink slow, he said. You chug it, you'll just throw it back up. Evelyn unscrewed the cap and took a careful sip. The water was warm and tasted like metal, and it was the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. She forced herself to stop after 3 swallows, even though every cell in her body screamed for more. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Cole just nodded and mounted his horse again. Then he extended a hand down to her. You can ride. I'll walk. I can walk? Lady, you look like you're going to fall over. Just get on the damn horse. There was no gentleness in his tone, but there was no cruelty either. Just bluntness, the kind that came from someone who didn't waste time on pretty words. Evelyn hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was calloused and strong, and he pulled her up behind him with an ease that suggested he'd done harder things than lifting exhausted women onto horses. She settled into the saddle, acutely aware of how close she was to him, how strange it felt to trust her weight to a man she'd met 5 minutes ago. But the alternative was walking 8 more miles in the dark, and she was too tired to pretend she had that in her. Cole clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving at an easy pace. He didn't try to make conversation, and Evelyn was grateful for it. She focused on not falling off, on the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, on the way the desert looked different now that the sun was gone. Less hostile, more vast, like it had infinite patience to outlast everything. After about 20 minutes, Cole spoke without turning around. You got a name? Evelyn Mercer. You come out here alone, Mrs. Mercer? She noticed the way he'd phrased it, not asking if she was married, but acknowledging that she had been, was, whatever tense applied to widows. Yes. That's either brave or stupid, probably both. Another flash of what might have been a smile. Fair enough? They rode in silence after that, and Evelyn let herself close her eyes for just a moment, just to rest them, just to stop looking at the endless stretch of nothing. She opened them what felt like seconds later, but the landscape had changed. The flat desert had given way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. In the distance, she could see lights, scattered and faint, but unmistakably human. "That's Dry Creek," Cole said. "We're not going there. Ranch is about 2 miles further." Evelyn nodded, though he couldn't see it. True to his word, Cole bypassed the town entirely, following a narrow trail that wound through increasingly rough terrain. The moon had risen, bright and full, casting everything in silver light that made the world look both beautiful and alien. Finally, they crested a low rise, and Evelyn saw it. The ranch. It wasn't much. A single-story house built from rough timber and stone, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a corral with a few horses, and several outbuildings in various states of repair. Everything looked functional, but worn, like it had been built to last but hadn't been loved in a long time. Still, compared to the desert she'd been walking through, it looked like salvation. Cole dismounted and helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled when she tried to stand, and he caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. "Barn or house?" he asked. Evelyn blinked at him. "What?" "You can sleep in the house or the barn. Both got beds. Your choice." It took her a moment to understand what he was really offering, the choice itself. Not just where to sleep, but the power to decide, to feel safe. "House," she said, testing him. Cole just nodded and led her toward the front door. The inside of the house was as sparse as the outside suggested. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. A fireplace on one wall, a simple wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies and books. 2 doors led off the main room. One presumably to a bedroom, one to storage or something else. It was clean, though, organized. The kind of space maintained by someone who lived alone and liked it that way. Cole lit a lamp and warm light filled the room. He moved to the stove and started building a fire with practiced efficiency. "There's a washroom through that door," he said, nodding toward one of the side doors. "Basin's got clean water. You can clean up if you want. I'll make food." Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist she could help, but her body had other ideas. She was filthy, exhausted, and the idea of washing her face made her want to cry. "Thank you," she said again. The washroom was small but functional. A basin, a mirror, some towels, and a bar of soap that smelled like lye and something herbal. Evelyn stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face was burned red from the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding, her hair a matted disaster. Dust covered every inch of her skin. She looked like something that had crawled out of the desert barely alive. Because that's exactly what she was. She washed her face, her hands, her neck, anywhere she could reach without undressing. The water turned brown almost immediately, and she had to change it twice before it started running clear. By the time she finished, she felt almost human again. When she came back to the main room, Cole had food waiting on the table. Nothing fancy, beans, cornbread, and some kind of dried meat. But it smelled better than anything Evelyn had eaten in weeks. She sat down without being invited and started eating. She tried to be polite about it, tried to eat slowly, but she was so hungry that manners seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. Cole sat across from her with his own plate, eating in the same efficient way he seemed to do everything else. He didn't watch her, didn't make conversation, just let her eat in peace. Finally, when she'd cleaned her plate and felt like her stomach might actually forgive her for the previous week of neglect, Evelyn looked up at him. "Why?" she asked. Cole raised an eyebrow. "Why what?" "Why help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone. Could be dangerous." He considered that for a moment, then shrugged. "Could be, but you're not. How do you know?" "Because dangerous people don't ask questions like that." It was a strange answer, but somehow it made sense. "My husband died 2 months ago," Evelyn heard herself say. She hadn't planned to tell him that, hadn't planned to tell him anything. But the words came out anyway, like pressure finally finding a release. Heart gave out. "We were supposed to come out here together, start fresh. He bought land near Black Hollow, thought we could build something, thought we could leave our old lives behind and become different people." Cole listened without interrupting. "I buried him in Missouri and kept going because I didn't know what else to do. Couldn't go back home, didn't have one anymore, so I came out here to claim the land he died believing in." She laughed, but it came out bitter. "Turns out the land doesn't exist." Or it does, but it's worthless. Either way, I walked halfway across the frontier for nothing. Maybe, Cole said. Or maybe you just found the wrong place. What's that supposed to mean? Means Black Hollow's dead, but Dry Creek isn't. Not yet, anyway. Place could use someone like you. Someone like me? You don't know anything about me. I know you walked through that desert alone rather than quit. That's more than most people got. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Cole stood and started clearing the plates. You can have the bedroom. I'll sleep out here. You don't have to. I'm not arguing about this. You need rest. Real rest. Take it. His tone left no room for debate. Evelyn stood, suddenly aware of how much her body hurt, how heavy her eyelids felt. Thank you, she said for the third time that night. For everything. Cole just nodded, already turning back to the stove. The bedroom was simple. A bed with clean sheets, a small dresser, a window that looked out over the dark expanse of the ranch. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, testing it. It was firm, but comfortable, and after weeks of sleeping on the ground or not sleeping at all, it felt like the finest hotel bed in the world. She lay down fully clothed, too tired to even take off her boots. Within seconds, she was asleep. Evelyn woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the previous night came back in pieces. The desert, Cole Bennett, the ride to the ranch. She sat up, disoriented, and realized she'd slept through the entire night without waking once. When was the last time that had happened? She stood and walked to the window. In daylight, the ranch looked different. Still worn, still rough, but more alive somehow. She could see Cole in the corral, working with a horse, moving with the kind of patience that suggested he had all the time in the world. Evelyn left the bedroom and found coffee waiting on the stove, still hot. A plate of eggs and bread sat on the table with a note written in rough handwriting. Eat, I'll be outside. She ate standing up, watching Cole through the window. He moved like someone who'd been working with animals his whole life, confident, calm, no wasted motion. The horse he was training clearly trusted him, responding to subtle cues that Evelyn couldn't even see. When she finished eating, she washed her plate and walked outside. Cole glanced up as she approached but didn't stop working. You sleep? Better than I have in months. Good. Evelyn leaned against the corral fence, watching him work. After a few minutes, she said, You meant what you said last night? About Dry Creek needing someone like me? I did. What does Dry Creek need? Cole brought the horse to a stop and finally turned to face her fully. Right now? Everything. Town's dying. Drought killed most of the crops. Ranchers are abandoning their land because a man named Silas Granger's been buying up properties for nothing and pushing out anyone who won't sell. He controls most of the water rights, most of the supplies, most of the debt. People are scared of him. And you? I'm not scared of him, but I'm also not stupid enough to fight him alone. What's that got to do with me? Cole secured the horse and walked over to the fence, standing close enough that Evelyn could see the lines around his eyes, the gray starting to thread through his dark hair. Town used to have a school, he said, closed about a year ago when the teacher left. Parents have been trying to find someone to reopen it, but no one wants the job. Not enough pay, too much risk. But if someone did... He trailed off, letting her fill in the rest. You think I should be a teacher? I think you said your husband wanted to build something out here. Maybe you still can. Just not where you thought. Evelyn stared at him, trying to figure out if this was genuine or some kind of con. But Cole's expression was as unreadable as ever. Not pushing, not manipulating, just presenting an option. I don't know anything about this town, she said. Neither did I when I got here. Figured it out. How long have you been here? Something dark flickered across Cole's face. 5 years. And you stay because leaving would mean admitting this place beat me. I don't lose to places. There was a story there, Evelyn realized, a painful one. But Cole didn't offer it, and she didn't ask. Instead, she said, I'll think about it. Fair enough. They stood in silence for a while, and Evelyn realized something strange. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not back to walking alone through empty desert toward nothing. Maybe Cole was right. Maybe she'd just been looking in the wrong place. Tell me about Dry Creek, she said finally. Everything. Cole looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Come on, he said. I'll show you. Boss. They rode into Dry Creek late morning, and Evelyn understood immediately why Cole had called it a dying town. Main Street was barely more than a wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings that looked like they were held together by hope and stubbornness. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few other structures whose purposes weren't immediately clear. Maybe 30 buildings total, half of them looking abandoned. People moved through the streets slowly, like they were conserving energy for things that mattered more than urgency. Evelyn saw maybe 24 residents, men mostly, a few women, a handful of children playing in the dirt near the saloon. Everyone watched them ride in, not hostile, exactly, but wary. Outsiders clearly weren't common. Cole led her to the general store and dismounted. "Stay here," he said. "I need to handle something." He disappeared inside, leaving Evelyn sitting alone on the horse, acutely aware of all the eyes still watching her. A woman approached, older, maybe 50, with gray hair tied back and a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. "You're new," the woman said. Not a question. "Just passing through," Evelyn replied. "That's what they all say." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Margaret Hayes. I run the boarding house, such as it is." "Evelyn Mercer. You with Cole?" "He helped me out. I was lost in the desert." Margaret's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing her face. "Lucky he found you then. Cole's one of the good ones. Doesn't talk much, but he's got a decent heart under all that silence." He mentioned the town was struggling. "Struggling," Margaret laughed, but it was bitter. "That's a polite way to put it. We're dying, Mrs. Mercer. Slowly. Granger's making sure of it." "Why?" "Because dead towns are worth more to men like him than living ones. He wants everyone gone so he can sell the whole valley to the railroad. Doesn't care that this is our home. Doesn't care that some of us got nowhere else to go." Before Evelyn could respond, Cole emerged from the store carrying a sack of supplies. He nodded to Margaret, who nodded back, then mounted his horse. "Ready?" he asked Evelyn. "Ready." They rode down Main Street slowly, and Cole pointed out the important buildings. The saloon, run by a man named Frank, who watered down his whiskey but never cheated at cards. The blacksmith, operated by Tom Wheeler, who could fix anything metal but couldn't fix his drinking problem. The boarding house Margaret ran, which had 3 residents and room for 20 more. And at the far end of the street, set back from the other buildings like it was ashamed of itself, was the schoolhouse. Cole stopped in front of it. The building was small, maybe 20 feet by 30, with windows that were cracked or missing entirely. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Weeds grew up through gaps in the front steps. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, not months. "That's it?" Evelyn asked. "That's it." She dismounted and walked closer, peering through one of the broken windows. Inside, she could see overturned desks, a ruined chalkboard, and debris scattered across the floor. It was worse than she'd imagined. "No one's even tried to maintain it," she said. "Why would they? No teacher, no school." Evelyn turned to look at him. "You really think I could do this?" "I think if you want to, you could." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I got." They stared at each other, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The same thing she'd felt when Thomas had first shown her the deed to Black Hollow, before reality crushed it. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe possibility was enough to start with. "If I did this," she said slowly, "I'd need supplies, books, desks, someone to fix the building. Town would help with that. They've been wanting this for months. And Granger?" Cole's expression hardened. "Granger would be a problem. But he's a problem anyway. Might as well give him a reason to be mad that actually helps people." Evelyn walked up the broken steps and pushed open the crooked door. It groaned in protest, but opened far enough for her to slip inside. The interior was worse than the exterior suggested. Everything was covered in dust and debris. Rodents had made nests in the corners. The smell of rot and abandonment hung in the air. But underneath all that, she could see the bones of something good. High ceilings that would keep the room cool in summer. Large windows that would provide natural light. Space enough for 30 students, maybe more. It would take work. A lot of work. But Evelyn had walked through the desert alone for 3 weeks, carrying nothing but a dead man's dream. She knew something about impossible work. Cole appeared in the doorway behind her. "What do you think?" I think it's a mess. That's not what I asked. Evelyn took a breath, then another. Then she turned to face him. I think I'll stay, she said. At least long enough to see if this is possible. Something flickered across Cole's face. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Hard to tell. All right then, he said. Let's get started. Word spread through Dry Creek faster than wildfire through dead grass. The widow from back east was going to reopen the school. Cole Bennett had brought her in. She was staying at his ranch. People had opinions about all of it, and they weren't shy about sharing them. Evelyn heard the whispers her first week in town. Heard them in the general store when she bought supplies. Heard them outside the saloon when she walked past. Heard them in the careful way Margaret Hayes asked if she was comfortable staying out at Cole's place. She ignored most of it. Let people talk. She'd learned a long time ago that trying to control what people said about you was like trying to hold water in your hands, pointless and exhausting. What mattered was the work, and there was a lot of it. The schoolhouse was worse than she'd initially thought. The roof leaked in 4 places. Half the floorboards were rotted through. The stove was rusted beyond repair. The desks that remained were broken or unusable. The chalkboard was cracked so badly it couldn't hold chalk anymore. Evelyn stood in the middle of the disaster on her 3rd morning in Dry Creek and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. You look like you're regretting your life choices. She turned to find a man standing in the doorway, tall, well-dressed by Frontier standards, with the kind of confidence that came from owning things. He was maybe 40, with graying hair and a smile that didn't match his eyes. Just assessing the situation, Evelyn said carefully. Big situation to assess. The man walked into the room uninvited, his boots loud on the damaged floor. I'm Silas Granger. I own most of the businesses in town. The general store, the saloon, few other properties. I've heard of you. I'm sure you have. His smile widened. And you're the widow Bennett dragged in from the desert, Evelyn Mercer, right? That's right. Granger walked a slow circle around the room, taking in the damage with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing amusing. I heard you're planning to reopen this place, turn it back into a school. That's the idea. Interesting. He stopped in front of her, standing just a little too close. Mind if I ask why? Does it matter? Everything matters in a small town, Mrs. Mercer, especially when someone new shows up and starts changing things. Evelyn held his gaze, refusing to step back. I'm not changing anything, just fixing what's already here. That's where you're wrong. Granger's voice stayed pleasant, but something cold crept into his eyes. This building's been closed for a year. Town's been doing fine without it. Some might say better. People around here work for a living. They don't have time for books and fancy learning. Some people might say that. You saying it? I'm saying I'm concerned about wasted effort. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. This town is struggling because it's stuck in the past. What it needs isn't a school. It needs to accept reality and move on. Move on to what? Progress. Development. A future that doesn't involve breaking your back on failed ranches and dying crops. Evelyn understood then what Cole had meant. Granger didn't want Dry Creek to survive. He wanted it to die so he could profit from the corpse. I appreciate your concern, she said, keeping her voice level, but I've already made my decision. Granger studied her for a long moment, and Evelyn got the distinct impression she was being evaluated as a threat. Finally, he smiled again. That same empty smile. Well, I hope it works out for you, Mrs. Mercer, truly. But if you need anything, supplies, assistance, financial backing, you come see me first. I like to keep track of investments in this town. I'll keep that in mind. He tipped his hat and walked out, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the ruined schoolhouse with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd just made an enemy. She knew it as surely as she knew the sun would set tonight. The question was what he'd do about it. Cole arrived an hour later with Tom Wheeler, the blacksmith, and 2 other men Evelyn didn't recognize. They brought tools, lumber, and the kind of quiet determination that suggested they'd done hard work before and weren't afraid of more. Heard you had a visitor, Cole said without preamble. News travels fast. Granger makes sure it does. What'd he say? That I'm wasting my time. That the town doesn't need a school. Tom Wheeler spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Granger can go to hell. My kids need schooling same as anyone's. The other men murmured agreement. Cole looked at Evelyn. You want to quit? No. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 6 hours tearing out rotted floorboards and patching the roof. The work was brutal, hot, exhausting, and dangerous in places where the structure threatened to collapse entirely. But the men worked without complaint, and Evelyn worked alongside them, ignoring Tom's protests that she should supervise instead of hauling debris. I'm not supervising, she told him. This is my project. I work. Tom looked at Cole, who just shrugged. Don't look at me. I already learned she doesn't listen. By sunset, they'd made real progress. The roof was patched, most of the rotted flooring was removed, and the debris was cleared out. It still looked terrible, but it looked like something that could maybe, eventually, become functional again. The men left as darkness fell, promising to return the next day. Cole lingered, checking the roof patches one more time. You didn't have to help, Evelyn said. You've already done more than enough. Someone had to make sure you didn't get yourself killed on a collapsing roof. I'm not helpless. Didn't say you were. But you're also not a carpenter. There's a difference. Evelyn started to argue, then stopped. He was right. She'd been trying so hard to prove she could do everything herself that she'd forgotten how to accept help that was freely offered. Thank you, she said instead. Cole nodded and mounted his horse. You coming back to the ranch? Evelyn had been staying in Cole's spare room all week, and every night she told herself she'd find other arrangements tomorrow. But Margaret's boarding house was full, and there wasn't anywhere else in town that would take a single woman without asking questions she didn't want to answer. If the offer's still open. It's open. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. It had become their routine. Work all day, ride home in the dark, eat dinner without much conversation, then retreat to separate spaces. Cole never pushed for more, never asked personal questions, never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond basic courtesy. It was strange how easy it had become. That night, after dinner, Evelyn found Cole sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark expanse of his land. She'd noticed he did this most evenings, just sat there, looking at nothing, like he was keeping watch over something that didn't exist. She sat down beside him without asking. Can I ask you something? She said after a while. You can ask. Why'd you really help me? In the desert, I mean. You could have just ridden past. Cole was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 5 years ago, I had a wife, Sarah, and a son, James. He was 4. Evelyn's breath caught. Had. Past tense. Winter epidemic came through, Cole continued, his voice flat and distant. Fever. Killed half the children in Dry Creek and a third of the adults. I tried everything. Rode to 3 different towns looking for medicine. Borrowed money I didn't have. Begged every doctor within 50 miles. He stopped, and Evelyn heard everything he wasn't saying in that silence. They died 2 days apart, he finally said. James first, then Sarah. Buried them both on a Tuesday. Snowed the whole time. Cole, I don't want sympathy. I'm just answering your question. After they died, I stopped helping people. Stopped caring about anything except keeping this ranch running. Figured if I couldn't save the people who mattered, there wasn't much point in saving anyone else. So what changed? You were dying in the desert, and I rode past. He turned to look at her for the first time since starting the story. Made it about a mile before I couldn't do it anymore. Turned around. Found you still walking like you thought willpower would get you through. And you decided to help. Decided if I let another person die when I could have done something about it, I'd become someone I didn't want to be. He looked back at the darkness. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. She was always helping people. Always making me help people. Used to drive me crazy. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. The grief in his voice was old but not healed. The kind that never really went away, just became part of who you were. I'm sorry, she said quietly. About your family. Me too. They sat in silence after that, and Evelyn understood something she hadn't before. Cole wasn't helping her rebuild the school because he cared about education or the town's future. He was doing it because letting her fail felt too much like letting his family die all over again. It should have felt like pressure. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had shared with her since Thomas died. My husband wasn't a good man, she heard herself say. Everyone thought he was. He was charming, successful, well-liked. But he wasn't good. Cole didn't respond, just listened. He gambled. Lost most of our money before I even knew we were in debt. Then he got sick, his heart, and suddenly he decided we needed to start over. Bought that land near Black Hollow with money we didn't have. Told me it was our second chance. Was it? I don't know. He died before we could find out. She wrapped her arms around herself against the night cold. Part of me wonders if he knew. If he knew he was dying and bought that land just so I'd have something to do besides mourn him, like he was trying to give me a purpose because he knew I'd need one. Sounds like maybe he was a better man than you're giving him credit for. Or he was just guilty about destroying our life and trying to fix it at the last minute. Could be both. Evelyn laughed, surprised. Yeah, I guess it could be. They sat together until the cold drove them inside. And for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek, Evelyn felt like she'd found someone who understood what it meant to carry grief that never really ended. Odds. The school repairs took 3 weeks. Every day more people showed up to help. Tom Wheeler came most mornings with new lumber or tools. Margaret Hayes brought meals for the workers. A rancher named Frank Miller donated a new stove. Another family contributed desks they'd been storing in their barn. Even people who couldn't work donated money or supplies. The town was investing in itself again, and Evelyn realized that maybe Cole had been right. Maybe Dry Creek didn't need just a school. Maybe it needed something to believe in. Something that wasn't survival or fear or Granger's promises about a better future somewhere else. But Granger wasn't idle. 2 weeks into the repairs, Evelyn arrived at the schoolhouse to find the new window glass shattered. A week after that, someone stole the donated stove in the middle of the night. Then the lumber pile was vandalized, boards scattered, and broken. No one could prove it was Granger's doing, but everyone knew. He's trying to break your will, Margaret told Evelyn one afternoon. Wants you to give up before you even start. That's not going to work. I know. That's what worries me. Evelyn understood what she meant. If breaking her will didn't work, Granger would try something worse. She mentioned it to Cole that night. I know, he said. That's all? You know? What do you want me to say? That he's dangerous? You already figured that out. That he'll escalate? Of course he will. Men like Granger don't stop until someone makes them. And are you going to make him? Cole looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I've been avoiding Granger for 5 years. Easier to keep my head down, run my ranch, not get involved in town politics. But you're living under my roof. You're using my name to give yourself credibility in this town. Like it or not, I'm involved now. I never asked for that. No, you didn't. He stood and grabbed his hat. But that's where we are anyway. So the question isn't whether I'm involved, it's what I'm going to do about it. He walked out before she could respond, leaving Evelyn alone with the uncomfortable realization that she'd dragged Cole back into a fight he'd been deliberately avoiding for years. Fog. The school opened on a Tuesday morning in early October. 23 children showed up that first day, more than Evelyn had expected, more than the town had hoped for. They ranged in age from 6 to 15, some barely able to read, others surprisingly educated for frontier kids. They were shy at first, uncertain about this strange woman from back east, who talked differently and expected them to sit still for hours. But Evelyn had taught before, years ago, in a small town in Pennsylvania. She knew how to reach children who thought learning was pointless, knew how to make reading feel less like work and more like escape. By the end of the first week, they were hooked. She taught them reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. She taught them things their parents didn't know, things that made them feel like the world was bigger than Dry Creek and the struggling valley around it. She made them believe they could become something other than failed ranchers or desperate settlers. And the parents noticed. Within a month, Evelyn had become the most valuable person in Dry Creek. Families who'd been planning to leave suddenly found reasons to stay. Children who'd spent their days working on dying ranches started imagining different futures. The town, which had been slowly bleeding people and hope, started to stabilize. All because of a widow who'd been half dead in the desert 2 months earlier. Granger noticed too. He showed up at the school one afternoon in late October, walking in without knocking while Evelyn was teaching arithmetic to a group of younger students. Mr. Granger, Evelyn said evenly, we're in the middle of a lesson. I can see that. Very impressive. He smiled at the children, who stared at him with the wary silence kids reserve for adults they didn't trust. Mrs. Mercer, might I have a word? Outside? We're not finished for the day. It'll only take a moment. The tone in his voice suggested it wasn't really a request. Evelyn told the students to continue their work and followed Granger outside. He waited until they were away from the door before speaking. You've done well here. Better than I expected, honestly. The children seem to be thriving. Was there a point to this interruption? Direct. I appreciate that. Granger's smile faded. The point, Mrs. Mercer, is that you've created a problem. A problem. For me. For the town. For yourself. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. This is the deed to the schoolhouse property. I own it. Evelyn's stomach dropped. That's not possible. This is public land. Was public land. The previous town council sold it to me 3 years ago to settle debts. I've been letting it sit vacant because I had no use for it, but now you've gone and made it valuable again. What do you want? I want you to understand your situation. You're operating on my property without my permission. Technically, I could shut you down tomorrow. But you won't. Not if we can come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Granger moved closer, lowering his voice like they were sharing a secret. You're smart, educated. You could do well here if you made the right alliances. Work with me instead of against me. Convince these families that their future is with the railroad, not with dying ranches and failed dreams. You want me to tell them to sell? I want you to tell them the truth, that this valley is finished, that the best thing they can do is take my offer and start over somewhere that has an actual future. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to close the school for safety violations, unpaid rent, any number of legitimate reasons. You'll lose everything you've built, and these families will lose the one thing that's been giving them hope. He paused. Or worse, something could happen. Accidents occur on the frontier all the time. Buildings burn, people get hurt. Would be a shame if someone got injured in a structurally unsound schoolhouse. The threat was barely veiled, and they both knew it. Evelyn felt rage building in her chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculated kind that was far more dangerous. Get off my property. Your property? Mrs. Mercer, I just explained, I don't care what that paper says. This school belongs to the people who rebuilt it, to the families who need it, to the children who deserve something better than what men like you want to give them. She stepped closer, matching his earlier intimidation. So get off my property, now. Granger's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. He stared at her for a long moment, and Evelyn saw the exact moment he decided she was beyond reasoning with. His face went cold, empty of even pretend friendliness. I tried to be civil, he said quietly. Remember that. He walked away, and Evelyn stood there shaking, not from fear, though she was afraid, but from the adrenaline of having just declared war on the most powerful man in the territory. She went back inside to find all 23 students staring at her with wide eyes. They'd heard everything through the thin walls. Well, Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady, I believe we were working on fractions. Who can tell me what 2/3 of 9 is? A girl in the back raised her hand tentatively. 6? Exactly right. Let's continue. But her hands shook for the rest of the lesson, and she knew her students noticed. Oops. Cole was waiting at the schoolhouse when class ended. He leaned against the corral fence, arms crossed, looking like he'd been carved from the same hard stone as the desert around them. Heard you had a visitor, he said. Does everyone in this town report to you? Most people. The ones who matter. He pushed off the fence. What happened? Evelyn told him. All of it. The property deed, the threats, the ultimatum. Cole's expression grew darker with every word, and by the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tight she thought he might crack a tooth. That son of a bitch, he said quietly. What do I do? You already did it. You told him no. And now? Now we prepare for him to make good on his threats. Cole looked at the schoolhouse like he was evaluating it for weaknesses. I'll start sleeping here. Keep watch at night. You can't do that. You have a ranch to run. Ranch has survived worse than me spending a few nights away. This is more important. Why? The question came out more desperate than she'd intended. Why is this so important to you? It's just a school. It's not worth risking everything you have. Cole turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Because you're right, he said. It's not just a school. It's the first time in 5 years this town has believed in something besides fear. And maybe, he stopped, like he wasn't sure he should continue. Maybe it's the first time I've believed in something too. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to respond to the raw honesty in his voice, so she just nodded. Okay, then we protect it. Together. Together. They sealed the agreement with nothing more than a look, but it felt more binding than any contract Granger could have written. That night, Cole moved a bedroll into the schoolhouse storage room and started keeping watch. Other men from town volunteered to help. Tom Wheeler, Frank Miller, a few others who'd been looking for an excuse to stand up to Granger and finally found one worth the risk. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. It started with Tom Wheeler's blacksmith shop burning down in the middle of the night. No one was hurt, but Tom lost everything. His tools, his forge, years of work. The official story was that he'd left the fire burning too hot. Everyone knew better. 3 days later, Frank Miller's cattle were poisoned. 12 head dead by morning, the water trough contaminated with something toxic. Then Margaret Hayes was told that her boarding house had unpaid debts and would be seized unless she came up with money she didn't have. Granger was systematically attacking anyone who'd helped Evelyn rebuild the school, and he was doing it in ways that couldn't quite be proven, but everyone understood. The message was clear: support the school, and you'd be destroyed. Some people started backing away, quietly removing their children, apologizing but explaining they couldn't afford to lose everything. Evelyn understood. She didn't blame them. This was survival, and survival meant making impossible choices, but others doubled down. Tom Wheeler started working from a temporary forge behind the schoolhouse, refusing to be intimidated. Frank Miller organized the other ranchers into a loose alliance, pooling resources to protect each other. Margaret Hayes found a lawyer in a neighboring town who was willing to challenge Granger's debt claim for free. Dry Creek was choosing sides, and the line between those who'd fight and those who'd run was getting clearer every day. Cole watched it all with the quiet intensity of someone who'd seen this kind of conflict before and knew how it ended. He's going to escalate, he told Evelyn one night. This harassment campaign isn't working fast enough. He'll try something more direct. Like what? Like burning this place down with us in it? The words should have terrified her. Instead, they just made her angry. Then we make sure he can't. How? By making sure we're never alone. By having enough people here that he can't touch it without the whole town seeing. By making this place so public, so visible, that any attack becomes an attack on everyone. Cole studied her for a long moment. You're thinking like a fighter now. I'm thinking like someone who's not ready to lose. Good, because we're going to need that. They started keeping the schoolhouse open later, turning it into a community space where people could gather, talk, plan. It became the center of resistance without anyone formally declaring it as such. Parents stayed after classes to help with repairs. Ranchers stopped by to discuss shared problems. Even people who didn't have children started showing up just to be part of something that felt like hope. And Granger noticed. He started appearing more often in town, always watching, always evaluating. His men, and he definitely had men now, hired guns that everyone recognized but no one could quite prove were on his payroll, lurked around the edges of gatherings, making their presence known. The tension built like storm clouds on the horizon, and everyone knew it would break eventually. The only question was when. The answer came on a cold November night when Evelyn was working late, grading papers by lamplight while Cole dozed in his bedroll across the room. She heard the horses first, multiple riders, moving fast. Then voices, low and urgent. She shook Cole awake. Someone's outside. He was up instantly, moving to the window with the kind of speed that suggested he'd been expecting this. How many? Can't tell. At least 3, maybe more. Cole grabbed his rifle and checked the load. Stay inside. No matter what happens, stay inside. Cole, just do it. He slipped out the back door before she could argue, disappearing into the darkness. Evelyn moved to the window, trying to see what was happening, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She saw shadows moving between the buildings. heard more voices, closer now. Then a shout, sudden and sharp, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Someone was trying to get inside. Evelyn grabbed the only weapon she had, a heavy fire poker from beside the stove, and positioned herself near the door. If they got in, she'd fight. She was done running, done hiding, done letting men like Granger decide what she was allowed to have. But before anyone could break through, she heard Cole's voice, loud and commanding. "That's far enough." Then Tom Wheeler. "You boys lost?" Then other voices she recognized, men from town, suddenly there, suddenly standing between the schoolhouse and whoever had come to destroy it. There was a tense silence, the kind where everyone was deciding whether this was going to end in words or blood. Evelyn held her breath, gripping the poker so hard her hands hurt. Finally, one of the riders spoke. "We don't want trouble." "Then you came to the wrong place," Cole said. "Turn around, leave. Don't come back." Another silence. Then the sound of horses turning, moving away, disappearing into the night. Evelyn exhaled and set down the poker with shaking hands. Cole came back inside a few minutes later, followed by Tom and 3 other men. They all looked wired, ready for violence that hadn't quite materialized. "They'll be back," Tom said. "You know that, right?" "I know," Cole replied. "So what do we do?" Cole looked at Evelyn, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just determination, but strategy. He'd been a rancher, a grieving widower, a man who kept to himself. But before that, she realized, he'd been something else. Someone who knew how to fight. "We stop waiting for Granger to make the next move," he said. "We make it first." The meeting happened in Frank Miller's barn 3 nights later, after dark, with men who looked like they'd forgotten how to hope, but were willing to try anger instead. 17 of them showed up, ranchers mostly, but also Tom Wheeler with burns still healing on his hands from the fire, and Margaret Hayes, who'd insisted on coming despite being the only woman besides Evelyn. They sat on hay bales and overturned crates, their faces lit by lantern light that cast shadows, making everyone look older and harder than they probably were. Cole stood at the center of it, and Evelyn realized she'd never actually seen him take charge of anything before. He'd always been quiet, careful, someone who helped from the edges. But now he stood like a man who'd done this before, and everyone in that barn shut up to listen. "Granger's been bleeding us for 3 years, Cole said without preamble. Buying up water rights, controlling supply lines, putting pressure on anyone who won't sell. Some of you have lost property. Others have lost livestock, businesses, or money you'll never see again. And all of it's been done just legal enough that nobody could prove anything. We know all this," a rancher named Davies said. "That's why we're here. Question is what we're going to do about it." "We're going to prove it," Cole said. "And then we're going to make sure everyone from here to the territorial capital knows exactly what he's been doing." "How?" Tom asked. "Man's got lawyers, got connections, got enough money to make problems disappear. He's also got records, contracts, deeds, letters." Cole pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I've been asking around. Turns out Granger keeps everything in a safe at the land office. Documents proving he's been manipulating property sales, forging signatures, buying officials. Everything we'd need to prove he's been running a criminal operation." Frank Miller leaned forward. "You're talking about breaking into the land office." "I'm talking about retrieving evidence of crimes. There's a difference." "Not to a judge there isn't." "Then we make sure we don't get caught." The barn went silent except for the sound of horses shifting in their stalls. What Cole was suggesting wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of thing that could get them all arrested or killed. Evelyn stood up, every head turned toward her. "I need to say something," she said. "All of you have been helping me rebuild that school. You've donated time, money, materials. You've stood up to Granger when it would have been easier to walk away. And I'm grateful for that. But this," she gestured at Cole, "this is different. This isn't about protecting a school anymore. This is about starting a war." "We're already in a war," Margaret said quietly. "We just haven't been fighting back." "Maybe. But if we do this, there's no taking it back. Granger will know it was us. He'll retaliate. People could get hurt. People could die." Evelyn looked around the barn, meeting as many eyes as she could. "So I need everyone here to understand what they're agreeing to. This isn't noble. It's not clean. It's just desperate people doing desperate things because we're out of other options." "You trying to talk us out of it?" Davies asked. "I'm trying to make sure you know what you're choosing. Another silence, longer this time. Then Frank Miller stood. "My family's been on this land for 12 years, he said. "My father died building that ranch. My kids were born there. Granger wants me gone so bad he's willing to poison my cattle and starve me out. So yeah, I know what I'm choosing. I'm choosing to fight back while I still can." "I'm in," Tom said immediately. Then Margaret. "Me too." One by one, they all agreed. Not because they wanted to, Evelyn realized, but because Cole was right. They were out of options. "All right," Cole said, "then here's how we do it." The plan was simple in the way that most dangerous plans were simple. 3 men would break into the land office after midnight. They'd crack the safe, photograph the documents using a camera Tom had somehow acquired, then get out before anyone noticed. The rest would serve as lookouts and diversions. "What about me?" Evelyn asked. "You stay here." "Like hell I do." Cole's expression hardened. "This isn't about whether you can handle it. It's about risk. You're the most visible person in this fight. If you get caught breaking into a government building, Granger can shut down the school permanently and have you arrested. We can't afford that. So I just wait while you do the dangerous work." "Yes." They stared at each other, and Evelyn felt the frustration building in her chest. He was right, and she hated it. Hated being the one who had to stay safe while others risked everything. "Fine," she said, "but if something goes wrong, I'm not just sitting around waiting to hear about it. If something goes wrong, you run the school and keep these families together. That's not nothing." The meeting broke up an hour later with plans made and roles assigned. Evelyn rode back to Cole's ranch in silence, angry at being sidelined but understanding the logic. Cole didn't try to make conversation, which she appreciated. When they got back, he started checking his weapons with the methodical care of someone who'd used them before and knew what happened when you didn't maintain them properly. "You were a soldier," Evelyn said. Not a question. Cole looked up from cleaning his rifle. "What makes you say that?" "The way you took charge tonight. The way you planned that break-in. You've done this kind of thing before." He went back to cleaning. "I was a lot of things before I came here. Not all of them good." "Were you a soldier?" "For a while, during the war." He set the rifle aside and started on his pistol. "Cavalry. Did 3 years before I got tired of killing people for reasons that stopped making sense." "Is that when you met Sarah?" "After. I was trying to figure out who I was without a uniform and a gun. She helped with that." His hand stilled on the pistol. "Made me believe I could be someone worth knowing, someone who built things instead of destroying them. And now you're back to destroying things." "No. Now I'm protecting what someone I care about built. There's a difference." The words hung in the air between them, and Evelyn felt something shift. Someone I care about. Not the school, not the town. Someone. She didn't know what to do with that, so she changed the subject. "When are you going?" "Tomorrow night. Moon's new, so it'll be dark enough." "And if you get caught?" "Then you make sure the school survives anyway. Promise me." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that wasn't fair, that he couldn't ask her to carry that weight. But she saw the look in his eyes and knew he needed to hear it. "I promise," she said. Cole nodded, satisfied, and went back to cleaning his weapons. Evelyn went to bed that night knowing she wouldn't sleep, and she was right. She lay in the dark listening to the wind and thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong, thinking about what it would mean if Cole got caught or killed, thinking about how she'd become so tangled up with this quiet, broken man that his death would feel like losing Thomas all over again. Except it wouldn't be the same, she realized. With Thomas, she'd mourned what they were supposed to have been. With Cole, she'd be mourning what they actually were. The distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. The next day crawled past like something wounded. Evelyn taught her classes on pure autopilot, barely aware of what she was saying. The children seemed to sense something was wrong, but they didn't ask questions. Maybe they were used to adults being tense and distracted. Maybe that was just how life worked out here. Cole spent the day at the ranch preparing. He didn't come into town, didn't stop by the school. Evelyn told herself that was good, that he needed to focus, that she needed to focus. She failed spectacularly at both. When the last student left, Evelyn locked up the schoolhouse and stood outside, staring at the darkening sky. She should go back to the ranch, should eat dinner, pretend everything was normal, wait for news like Cole had asked her to. Instead, she mounted her horse and rode toward town. She found Margaret Hayes in the boarding house kitchen, making coffee that smelled like it could strip paint. "You're supposed to be at the ranch," Margaret said without looking up. "I know. And yet here you are." "Here I am." Margaret poured 2 cups and handed one to Evelyn. They sat at the kitchen table in silence for a while, drinking coffee that was exactly as terrible as it smelled. "You love him," Margaret said finally. Evelyn almost choked on her coffee. "What?" "Cole, you love him. It's obvious to anyone with eyes." "I barely know him." "You know him well enough, and he knows you. Question is what you're going to do about it." "Nothing. There's nothing to do about it. We're fighting to save this town. That's what matters." Margaret gave her a look that suggested she'd heard that particular lie before and wasn't buying it. "You know what your problem is? You think you have to choose between the school and Cole, between saving the town and saving yourself. But that's not how it works." "Then how does it work?" "You fight for what matters and hope you don't lose everything in the process. That's all any of us can do." Before Evelyn could respond, they heard horses outside. Multiple riders, moving fast. Both women stood and moved to the window. Cole, Tom Wheeler, and a man Evelyn didn't recognize were dismounting in front of the boarding house. Even in the dim light from the windows, she could see they looked rattled. Margaret opened the door before they could knock. "Well?" "We got it," Tom said. He held up a leather satchel. "Every document in that safe. Contracts, letters, forged deeds, everything." "Anyone see you?" Margaret asked. "Don't think so. We were careful." "Careful's not good enough. Either they saw you or they didn't." "They didn't," Cole said. His voice was tight, controlled. "But it was close. We need to develop these photographs tonight and get them somewhere safe. If Granger figures out what we did before we can expose him, all of this was for nothing." "Tom's got a dark room in his temporary shop," the third man said. "We can do it there." They started moving toward the door, but Cole stopped and looked at Evelyn. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you." Something flickered across his face. "I told you to stay at the ranch." "I don't take orders well. You should have figured that out by now." Despite everything, Cole almost smiled. "Come on. You might as well see this through." They went to Tom's makeshift blacksmith shop, which was really just a lean-to behind the burned remains of his original building. The dark room was a curtained-off corner that smelled like chemicals and desperation. Tom worked while the rest of them waited outside, smoking cigarettes and trying not to think about what would happen when Granger discovered the theft. It took 2 hours to develop all the photographs, and by the time Tom emerged with the finished prints, everyone was wound tight enough to snap. "Got everything," Tom said, spreading the photos on a workbench. "Look at this." They crowded around, and Evelyn felt her stomach turn as she looked at the evidence. Contracts showing Granger had bought the water rights illegally. Letters proving he'd bribed local officials. Forged deeds transferring property from families who'd never actually sold. A ledger showing payments to the men who'd burned Tom's shop and poisoned Frank's cattle. It was everything they needed. Proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. "What do we do with it?" Frank Miller asked. He'd appeared at some point, along with several other ranchers. Word was spreading fast. "We make copies," Cole said. "Multiple copies. Then we send them to the territorial governor, the federal marshal, and every newspaper within 200 miles. We make sure this gets so public that Granger can't make it disappear." "He'll know it was us," Davy said. "He already knows. Question is whether we can get this information out before he can stop us." "How long do we have?" "Maybe a day. Maybe less." Cole looked around at the assembled men. "We need riders, fast ones, people who can get these documents out of the valley before Granger realizes what happened." "I'll go," Tom said immediately. "You're too recognizable. Granger knows you'd be involved." "Then who?" Cole thought for a moment. "Margaret's nephew, the kid who works at the general store. He's young, fast, and nobody would suspect him. We send him to the territorial capital with copies for the governor and the marshal. Then we send someone else to the newspaper in Silver Ridge." "I'll go to Silver Ridge," Frank offered. "You sure?" "My ranch is dead anyway. Might as well make the trip worth something." They spent the next hour making copies of the most damaging documents and packaging them for delivery. Evelyn helped, her hands surprisingly steady considering everything that was happening. This was it. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Either this worked, or they'd all destroyed themselves for nothing. Margaret's nephew, a quiet kid named Daniel who couldn't have been more than 17, arrived just before midnight. Cole explained what he needed to do, and the kid nodded like he'd been asked to deliver groceries instead of evidence that could bring down the most powerful man in the territory. "When do I leave?" Daniel asked. "Now, before Granger figures out what happened." "What if he tries to stop me?" "Don't let him catch you." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Daniel took the package and left, riding hard into the darkness. Frank left an hour later, heading west toward Silver Ridge. Everyone else scattered to their homes, trying to look innocent, trying to act like they hadn't just committed what was probably several crimes in the name of justice. Cole and Evelyn were the last ones left at Tom's shop. They stood in the darkness, exhausted and wired at the same time. "We should get back to the ranch," Cole said. "In a minute. Evelyn, just give me a minute." She didn't know what she needed the minute for until she was taking it. Then she realized she was trying to memorize this moment, the feeling of having actually done something instead of just surviving, of fighting back instead of running, of choosing a side and accepting the consequences. "You did good tonight," Cole said quietly. "I didn't do anything. I just watched. You held everyone together. That's not nothing." Evelyn turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her life and then somehow become tangled up in it. "What happens tomorrow? When Granger figures it out?" "He comes for us. All of us. And then? Then we find out if we're strong enough to survive it." They rode back to the ranch in silence, both of them knowing that everything was about to change, and neither of them knowing if they'd survive the change. But Granger figured it out faster than anyone expected. By dawn the next morning, his men were searching the town. By noon, they'd found the broken lock on the land office and the empty safe. By sunset, everyone knew that someone had stolen documents that could destroy Granger's entire operation, and by nightfall, Granger had declared war. It started with his men riding through town, questioning everyone, threatening anyone who wouldn't talk. Then they started searching homes, claiming they had the right because this was theft from a government building. People who refused entry had their doors broken down. People who talked back were beaten. Evelyn heard about it at the school, where families started arriving with bruised faces and terrified children, looking for somewhere safe. She opened the doors and let them in, knowing she was making the schoolhouse a target but unable to turn away people who needed help. By the time Cole arrived with Tom and a dozen other men, the school was packed with women and children hiding from Granger's systematic destruction of any resistance. "This is it," Tom said. "He's not even pretending to be legal anymore. He's just tearing through town looking for those documents." "He won't find them," Cole said. "They're already gone." "He doesn't know that. And even if he did, he'd still tear this place apart just to prove he could." Cole looked around at all the frightened faces packed into the schoolhouse. "Then we make our stand here. All of us, together. He wants a fight. We give him one." "Cole, there's children here," Evelyn said. "I know. That's why we're not backing down. We start running now. Those kids learn the lesson that men like Granger always win. I won't teach them that." Before anyone could argue, they heard horses outside. A lot of them. Cole moved to the window and swore under his breath. He brought everyone. Must be 30 men out there. Evelyn joined him at the window and felt her heart sink. Granger sat on his horse in the middle of the street, surrounded by armed men. Some she recognized as drifters and hired guns. Others looked like legitimate ranch hands who'd probably been told this was legal work. Granger dismounted and walked toward the schoolhouse with the confidence of a man who knew he had all the power. "Stay inside," Cole told Evelyn. "No. This isn't negotiable. Neither is me. You go out there alone, you're dead. We go together or we don't go at all." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. Granger was already at the door. Cole opened it before Granger could knock. "Bennett," Granger said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, which made everything more terrifying. "I need to have a conversation with everyone inside this building. They don't want to talk to you. I'm not asking for permission. Someone stole property from the land office, government property. That makes this a federal crime. I have the authority to search this building and question everyone inside." "You don't have any authority. You're a private citizen with delusions of power." Granger's smile didn't waver. Am I? Well, that's interesting, because the territorial marshal seems to think otherwise. In fact, he deputized me and my men just this morning to help recover the stolen documents. So now I have all the authority I need. Cole's expression went dark. You bought yourself a badge. That doesn't make you legal. Doesn't make me illegal either. Now step aside or I'll move you aside. Try it. The threat hung in the air between them, and Evelyn could see both men calculating odds, weighing consequences, deciding how far they were willing to go. Then Margaret Hayes pushed past Cole and stood in the doorway. You want to arrest someone, Silas? Arrest me. I broke into your land office. I stole your documents. It was all me. No, Tom Wheeler said, joining her. It was me. I did it. Both of you are lying, Frank Miller said, appearing beside them. I'm the one who broke in. One by one, more people emerged from the schoolhouse, each claiming responsibility, each daring Granger to arrest them all. Within minutes, 15 people stood in the doorway, all confessing to the same crime. Granger looked at them with something that might have been respect if he'd been capable of such an emotion. Very noble, very dramatic, but it doesn't change anything. Someone has those documents and I will get them back. They're already gone, Cole said. Sent them to the territorial capital yesterday. By now the governor's probably reading them over breakfast. So you can tear this town apart looking for them, or you can accept that you're finished and leave before the federal marshals arrive to arrest you. For the first time since Evelyn had met him, Granger looked uncertain. His eyes darted to his men, then back to Cole, and she saw him doing the math, trying to figure out if Cole was bluffing, trying to decide if it mattered. You're lying, Granger said finally. Maybe. Want to bet your freedom on it? The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, slowly, Granger smiled. Not the empty smile he usually wore, but something darker, more honest. You know what the problem with people like you is? He said. You think because you're right, you'll win. But being right doesn't matter. Power matters. And I have more of it than you'll ever have. He turned and walked back to his horse. This isn't over, he called back. Not even close. Those documents might hurt me, might even get me arrested eventually. But before that happens, I'm going to make sure everyone who stood against me pays for it, starting with that school. He mounted his horse and looked directly at Evelyn. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance, Mrs. Mercer. Now you're going to learn what happens to people who think they can fight me and win. Then he and his men rode off, leaving the townspeople standing in the street, victorious and terrified at the same time. Cole turned to face the crowd. Everyone inside. We need to talk about what comes next. They filed back into the schoolhouse, and Evelyn realized they'd just won a battle while simultaneously starting a war they weren't ready for. The next 3 days were tense. Granger's men patrolled the edges of town but didn't enter, didn't cause trouble, just watched and waited, making their presence known. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. People were scared, jumping at shadows, wondering when Granger would make his move. The answer came on a Thursday night when storm clouds were building on the horizon and the air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Evelyn was alone in the schoolhouse, working late on lesson plans when she smelled smoke. Not the normal smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. This was different, sharper, more chemical. She ran to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. The back of the schoolhouse was on fire. Not a small fire. Not an accident. A massive, deliberate fire that was already consuming the storage room and spreading fast. Evelyn ran for the door, but the handle was burning hot. She tried the windows, but they were jammed shut from the outside. Someone had locked her in. They weren't just burning the school. They were trying to kill her. She grabbed a chair and swung it at the nearest window, shattering the glass. Smoke was pouring into the main room now, thick and black, making it hard to breathe. She climbed through the broken window, cutting her hands on the jagged glass, and fell into the dirt outside. The fire was everywhere now. The whole back half of the building was engulfed, and flames were spreading toward the front with terrifying speed. Evelyn stumbled away, coughing, her eyes streaming, trying to see through the smoke. That's when she heard the screaming. Children. Inside the building. No. That was impossible. She'd been alone. She'd checked. Everyone had gone home hours ago. But the screaming continued, high-pitched and terrified, coming from somewhere inside the burning school. Evelyn ran back toward the building, but the heat drove her back. The smoke was too thick, the flames too intense. She couldn't see anything. Then Cole was there, appearing out of the darkness like something summoned by need. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He just grabbed her arm and said, "Where?" "Inside. I heard children. I don't know how many." Cole stripped off his jacket, soaked it in the horse trough, and wrapped it around his face. Then he ran directly into the burning building. Evelyn tried to follow, but someone grabbed her. Tom Wheeler, his face soot-stained and desperate. "You can't go in there," he said. "He'll die." "Then so will you. Let him do this." Other people were arriving now, drawn by the smoke and flames. They formed a bucket brigade from the well, throwing water on the fire. But it was clearly too little too late. The school was gone. The only question was whether Cole could get out before it collapsed. Seconds stretched into eternity. Evelyn watched the building burn and prayed to anything that might be listening that Cole would emerge. Then she saw movement in the doorway. Cole carrying two children, one under each arm. He stumbled out and collapsed on the dirt, gasping for air, the children crying but alive. A woman Evelyn didn't recognize ran forward and grabbed the children. "Oh, thank heaven! Oh, thank heaven! I told them to go home. I thought they'd gone home." More people emerged from the building. Not children. Tom's brother, carrying a third child. Then Frank Miller with a fourth. They'd all gone in. All risked their lives, and they'd saved everyone. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside Cole, who was coughing so hard his whole body shook. His hands were burned. His face was covered in soot and blood from where falling debris had hit him. "You stupid, reckless!" Evelyn couldn't finish the sentence, could barely breathe herself. Cole looked up at her through the smoke and chaos. "You okay?" "You're asking if I'm okay? You ran into a burning building. Had to. You were screaming about kids. I thought I was alone. I didn't know." "I know." He coughed again, harsh and wet. "But you heard them. That's what matters." The schoolhouse collapsed behind them with a sound like the world ending. Flames shot into the sky, sending sparks dancing into the darkness. Years of work, months of hope, everything they'd built, gone. Evelyn watched it burn and felt something inside her break. Not grief, not fear, something harder, colder, rage. She stood and looked at the crowd of townspeople gathered to watch their future turn to ash, looked at their faces and saw the same thing she felt reflected back. They were done being afraid. "Where's Granger?" she asked. "Rail depot," someone said. "Heard his men talking earlier. He's there now, probably celebrating." Evelyn started walking. Cole grabbed her arm. "Where are you going?" "To end this." "Evelyn?" "No." She pulled away from him. "No more waiting. No more defending. He tried to kill me tonight. Tried to kill those children. He wants a war? Then that's what he gets." She kept walking, and behind her she heard people following. Cole, Tom, Margaret, Frank. Others whose names she didn't know, but whose anger she recognized. They walked through Dry Creek like an army, covered in soot and blood, carrying the kind of fury that came from being pushed too far for too long. And at the front of it all was a widow from back east who'd survived the desert and decided she could survive anything else this place wanted to throw at her, including Silas Granger. The rail depot sat at the edge of town like a monument to promises nobody believed anymore. Half-finished platform, rusted tracks that didn't connect to anything. A small office building where Granger conducted the kind of business that required privacy, and people who knew when to look away. Light spilled from those windows as Evelyn and her makeshift army approached. She could hear voices inside, laughter, the clink of glasses. Celebrating. They were celebrating while ash from the schoolhouse still drifted through the night air. Cole caught up to her about 50 feet from the building. His breathing was still ragged from the smoke, and he moved like his ribs hurt, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Let me go in first," he said. "No." "Evelyn, this needs to be done smart." Smart would have been 6 months ago. Smart would have been before he tried to burn me alive. We're past smart. She kept walking. "You can come with me or stay out here. Your choice." Cole fell into step beside her. Behind them, she heard the others following, their footsteps loud in the quiet night. No one was trying to be subtle anymore. Subtlety was for people who still thought they might avoid violence. Evelyn kicked open the depot door without knocking. The room went silent. 6 men sat around a table covered in whiskey bottles and cards. Granger stood at the window, a glass in his hand, looking like he'd been watching the fires glow in the distance. His hired guns lounged against the walls, trying to look casual and failing. Granger turned slowly, his expression cycling through surprise, amusement, and something that might have been respect before settling on cold calculation. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I have to say, I'm impressed you made it out. When my men told me they'd secured all the exits, I assumed—" He paused, pretending to consider his words. "Well, I assumed you'd be too busy to visit. You tried to kill me. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I have a burned building and 4 children who were locked inside with me. Tragic, truly, but accidents happen. Old buildings, dry wood, a lantern knocked over in the confusion." "Stop talking," Evelyn said. Her voice came out flat and cold, stripped of anything resembling negotiation. "You're done. The documents are already with the territorial governor. Federal marshals are probably on their way here right now. Your little empire is finished." Granger smiled and took a sip of his whiskey. "You really believe that? That some photographs and forged evidence will bring me down?" "They're not forged. Says you. Says a desperate group of failing ranchers who'd say anything to avoid losing their land. My lawyers will tear your accusations apart in minutes. And even if they don't, even if somehow you manage to get me arrested, do you really think that changes anything?" He gestured around the room. "I own this depot. I own the land it's on. I own the water rights, the supply contracts, the debt half this town is drowning in. Even if I go to prison, someone else will step in and finish what I started. You can't fight progress, Mrs. Mercer. You can only decide whether you get crushed by it or profit from it." "Then I guess I choose crushed." She pulled out the pistol she'd taken from Cole's ranch and pointed it at Granger's chest. The room erupted. Granger's men reached for their weapons. The townspeople behind Evelyn spread out, some armed, others just angry enough not to care. Cole moved to Evelyn's side, his own gun drawn. "Whoa now," one of Granger's hired guns said. "Let's everybody just calm down." "Shut up," Evelyn said without taking her eyes off Granger. "I've spent 3 months listening to men tell me to calm down. I'm done with that. I'm done with all of it." Her hand was surprisingly steady. "You want to know what I learned since I came here? I learned that survival isn't the same as living. I learned that hope is something you build, not something you find. And I learned that sometimes the only way to stop a man like you is to make him more afraid of what you'll do than you are of what he can do to you." "You going to shoot me?" Granger asked. He didn't sound scared, just curious. "I'm thinking about it." "In front of all these witnesses? You'd hang for murder." "Maybe, but you'd still be dead." They stared at each other, and Evelyn felt time slow down the way it did when you stood at the edge of something irreversible. She'd never killed anyone, never even thought she was capable of it. But standing there, looking at the man who tried to burn her and 4 children alive, she understood how people crossed that line. Cole's voice came quiet beside her. "Evelyn, don't." "Why not? Give me one good reason." "Because he's not worth it. Because you're better than this. Because—" He paused. "Because you promised me you'd keep the school alive if something happened to me. Can't do that from a jail cell." His words cut through the rage enough for Evelyn to hear what he wasn't saying. He wasn't asking her to back down. He was asking her to choose a different fight. A longer one. One where they won by building something instead of destroying something. She lowered the gun. Not much. Just enough that it wasn't quite pointing at Granger's heart anymore. "You're right," she said. "He's not worth it." Granger laughed, relief and contempt mixing in the sound. "That's what I thought. All talk, no—" The door behind them crashed open, and everyone spun around. 3 men in federal marshal uniforms walked in, followed by 2 more carrying rifles. The lead marshal looked around the room, taking in the armed standoff, and sighed like this was just another day of dealing with frontier stupidity. "Someone want to tell me what's happening here?" he asked. "Marshal," Granger said smoothly, lowering his own weapon and adopting an expression of concern. "Thank goodness you're here. These people have been threatening me, making wild accusations." "Silas Granger?" the marshal interrupted. "Yes, that's correct. You're under arrest." The marshal pulled out a folded document. Warrant from the territorial governor. Charges include fraud, bribery, conspiracy, destruction of property, and attempted murder. He looked at his deputies. Take him. The room exploded into chaos. Granger's men went for their guns. The marshals raised their rifles. Cole pushed Evelyn behind him. Someone fired a shot that went wild, punching through the ceiling. Everyone stand down, the lead marshal roared. Next person who moves gets shot. Federal law is operating here, and you will all comply or you will all go to jail. The threat worked. Slowly, weapons were lowered. Granger's men backed away, suddenly very interested in pretending they'd just been following orders. Granger himself stood frozen, his face pale, looking at the warrant like it was written in a language he didn't understand. This is a mistake, he said. I have friends in the capital, important friends. One telegram and this goes away. Your friends are under investigation too, the marshal said. Turns out when you bribe officials, they don't stay loyal once the money stops. Funny how that works. He nodded to his deputies who moved forward with chains. Silas Granger, you have the right to… Granger moved fast, faster than anyone expected from a man his age. He grabbed the whiskey bottle off the table and threw it at the nearest marshal, then ran for the back door. He almost made it. Cole stuck out his leg at the last second, and Granger went down hard, his face hitting the floor with a crack that suggested his nose had just become acquainted with the rough wooden planks. The marshals were on him before he could get up, chains rattling as they secured his wrists. That wasn't necessary, Granger gasped through what was definitely a broken nose. Probably not, Cole agreed, but it sure felt good. They hauled Granger to his feet. Blood streamed down his face, and his expensive suit was torn and dirty. He looked nothing like the powerful man who'd controlled Dry Creek through fear and money. He looked small. You think this changes anything? He spat at Evelyn. You think you've won? I think you're going to prison, Evelyn said. That's enough for today. The marshals dragged him out. His hired guns were rounded up and arrested as accomplices. Within 20 minutes, the depot was empty except for the townspeople and the mess left behind. Evelyn walked outside and stood in the darkness, listening to the sound of horses carrying Granger away. She should have felt victorious, should have felt like they'd accomplished something. Instead, she just felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. Cole found her a few minutes later. Someone had bandaged his burned hands, and he'd washed some of the soot off his face, but he still looked like he'd been through a war. You okay? He asked. I almost killed him. But you didn't. Only because you stopped me. No. I just reminded you who you are. You're the one who chose not to pull that trigger. He leaned against the depot wall beside her. That's the difference between you and him. He'd have shot without thinking. You thought first. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I don't know, does it? Evelyn considered that. Maybe. A little. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last of the flames from the schoolhouse die down in the distance. The building was gone, completely destroyed, months of work reduced to ash and charred timber. We need to rebuild, Evelyn said finally. I know. And it needs to be bigger this time, better. Something that can't be burned down by one angry man with matches and money. That's going to take time and materials and money we don't have. Then we'll find it. We'll borrow it. We'll build it ourselves if we have to. She turned to look at him. I'm not giving up. He tried to kill me tonight, and all he did was make me more stubborn. Cole smiled despite everything. I've noticed. So you'll help? Did you really just ask me that? After everything? He shook his head. Of course I'll help. Question is whether you'll let me do it properly this time instead of charging in like you're invincible. I make no promises. Didn't think so. Tom Wheeler approached them, his face grim. Got bad news. Checked with the land office. Granger wasn't lying about owning the schoolhouse property. Deed's legitimate. Which means now that he's arrested, it'll probably get seized as evidence or sold to pay his debts. Then we buy it, Evelyn said. With what money? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Margaret Hayes joined them, followed by Frank Miller and several others. Everyone looked exhausted, covered in soot and smoke damage, but there was something different in their faces now, something that hadn't been there before. We need to talk about what happens next, Margaret said. With Granger gone, there's going to be a power vacuum. Other vultures will circle. We need to be ready. She's right, Frank said. Granger wasn't the only one trying to buy up this valley. He was just the most aggressive. Now that he's gone, others will try. So what do we do? Someone asked. Everyone looked at Cole. He'd been the one who'd organized the break-in, the one who'd led the defense of the school, the one who'd tripped Granger when he'd tried to run. Whether he wanted it or not, he'd become the person people looked to for answers. Cole seemed to realize it at the same moment everyone else did. Evelyn saw him tense, saw the old resistance rising up. He'd spent 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of responsibility. 5 years telling himself he wasn't the man to lead anyone. But then he looked at the burned remains of the schoolhouse in the distance, looked at the townspeople gathered around him, looked at Evelyn. "We form a council," he said finally. "Representatives from the ranchers, the businesses, the families. We pool our resources and we buy up whatever property we can before outsiders get their hands on it. We control our own water rights, our own land, our own future." "That'll take coordination," Tom said. "Someone to organize it." "Then we organize it. All of us." Cole looked around at the assembled faces. Dry Creek survives because everyone here decided it should. Not because one person saved it. We're done depending on powerful men to decide our fate. From now on, we decide for ourselves. There were murmurs of agreement, some skepticism, but mostly there was something that looked almost like hope. "What about the school?" Evelyn asked. "We rebuild it," Cole said. "But first we need to figure out where and how and—" He stopped, looking at her. "Actually, that should be your decision. It's your school. It's everyone's school. Maybe. But you're the one who started it. You get first say in how we build it back." Evelyn thought about that. Thought about the original building and everything they'd lost. Thought about Granger's threats and the fire and the children who'd almost died. "Not in town," she said finally. "Somewhere outside. Somewhere harder to attack. And we build it from stone this time. Something that won't burn." "Stone's expensive," Tom said. "Then we quarry it ourselves. Cut it by hand if we have to." She looked around at the faces gathered in the darkness. "We're going to build something that lasts. Something that outlives all of us. Something that proves people like Granger can't destroy what we build together." Frank Miller nodded slowly. "I know a place. About 3 miles north. There's a quarry there. Been abandoned for years, but the stone's still good. We could—" He paused, calculating. "We could do it. It'd take time, probably a year, maybe more. But we could do it." "Then that's what we do," Evelyn said. The meeting broke up shortly after that, everyone heading home to rest and process everything that had happened. Evelyn and Cole were among the last to leave, walking their horses back toward his ranch in the pre-dawn darkness. "You know this isn't really over," Cole said after a while. "Granger's arrested, but there'll be a trial. He'll hire expensive lawyers, might even get off on some technicality." "I know. And even if he doesn't, the valley's still struggling, still got drought, failed crops, families barely hanging on. One good school won't fix all of that." "I know that too. So why keep fighting? Why not just cut your losses and go somewhere easier?" Evelyn stopped walking and turned to face him. "Because I'm tired of running, tired of surviving instead of living, tired of letting men like Granger decide what I'm allowed to have." She paused. "And because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about proving my dead husband's dream was worth chasing. It started being about building my own dream. One I actually believe in." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "And what's that dream look like? A school that stands for 100 years. A town that thrives instead of just survives. Children who grow up believing they can become anything instead of just accepting whatever life gives them." She took a breath. "And maybe someone to build it with. If he's interested." The words hung between them, and Evelyn felt her heart hammering. She'd just proposed something far more binding than a business arrangement or a shared goal. She'd proposed a partnership, a life. Cole's expression was unreadable in the darkness. Then slowly, he smiled. Not the careful half-smile she'd seen before, but something real, something that reached his eyes. "I might be interested," he said, "depending on the terms." No terms, no conditions, just two people trying to build something good in a place that makes that hard. Sounds risky. Everything worth doing is risky. Cole reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, and the bandages on his burns were rough beneath her fingers. But his grip was steady. "Sure," Then I guess we're doing this, he said. I guess we are. They walked the rest of the way to the ranch hand in hand, and when the sun finally rose over the desert, it illuminated two people who'd entered the frontier carrying nothing but grief and had somehow found something to build together. The next months were brutal in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. The trial happened in early December. Granger's lawyers tried everything, claiming the documents were forged, attacking the credibility of witnesses, suggesting the fire had been an accident. But the evidence was too strong and too public. The newspapers had printed everything. The federal investigators had found even more corruption than the original documents revealed. Granger was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His assets were seized and auctioned off to pay his debts and restitution to his victims. Evelyn attended the sentencing with Cole and watched as the man who'd tried to kill her was led away in chains. She expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, she just felt empty. Justice didn't undo the damage, didn't bring back the original schoolhouse, or erase the fear his reign had created. It just meant they could move forward without him trying to stop them. The town council formed officially in January. Cole was elected chairman despite his protests, with Margaret as treasurer and Tom as security chief. Frank Miller took charge of organizing the ranchers into a proper cooperative. Others handled various needs: water rights, supply coordination, legal matters. For the first time in years, Dry Creek had actual governance instead of one man's corrupt control. The school rebuilding started in February. They cleared the quarry first, setting up a proper operation with shifts and equipment borrowed or bought from neighboring settlements. The stone came slow, block by block, cut by hand, hauled by wagon. It was backbreaking work that required the whole town's involvement. Evelyn taught classes in Margaret's boarding house while they built. 23 students became 30, then 40, then 50 as families from miles away heard about the school and moved to Dry Creek to enroll their children. They needed more teachers. Evelyn recruited 2 women from a neighboring town, one a former governess who'd lost her position, another a widow with education but no prospects. Together they taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and practical skills the frontier demanded. The new schoolhouse rose slowly through spring and into summer. Stone walls that wouldn't burn, a slate roof that would last decades, windows high enough to be defensible but large enough to let in light. It looked more like a fortress than a school, and that was exactly the point. They finished it in late August, almost a year after the fire. The day they opened the doors for the first time, the whole town showed up. Parents, children, ranchers, business owners, everyone who'd hauled stone or donated money or worked themselves raw to make this happen. Evelyn stood on the front steps with Cole beside her and looked at what they'd built. Not just a building, a statement. A promise that Dry Creek wouldn't be broken by men like Granger, or challenges like drought, or the 100 other ways the frontier tried to destroy hope. You did it, Cole said quietly. We did it. You started it. That counts for something. Evelyn shook her head. No, I walked out of the desert lost and broken. The town did the rest. I just gave them a reason to believe they could. The dedication ceremony was simple. No speeches, no pageantry. Just Margaret saying a few words about community and resilience, Tom raising a flag someone had sewn from donated fabric, and the children running inside to claim their new classroom. Afterward, there was food and music and the kind of celebration that came from surviving something that should have killed you. Evelyn found herself pulled into conversations with dozens of people, all wanting to thank her or tell her what the school meant to them. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like coming home. Late in the evening, when most people had gone back to their houses and ranches, Evelyn found Cole sitting on the schoolhouse steps, looking up at the stars. She sat beside him without speaking. They'd gotten good at comfortable silence over the past year, good at being together without needing to fill every moment with words. I was thinking, Cole said eventually, about what you said, about building something that lasts. What about it? I think we've done that. This school's going to stand for generations. Long after we're gone, there'll be children learning here, growing up here, becoming something more than what the frontier expects them to be. That was the plan. I know, but I've been thinking maybe we should build something else too, something more personal. Evelyn turned to look at him. What do you mean? Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He opened it to reveal a simple ring. Nothing fancy, just a silver band with a small stone embedded in it. "Made it myself," he said. "From silver I've been saving and a turquoise stone I found on my property years ago. It's not much, but it's perfect," Evelyn interrupted. She was crying suddenly, tears streaming down her face without warning. "Is that a yes?" "You haven't asked yet." Cole smiled. "Evelyn Mercer, will you marry me? Will you stay in this godforsaken desert and help me build a life that's worth living instead of just surviving?" "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, you fool. Of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which seemed impossible but somehow wasn't. Like everything else about their relationship, it shouldn't have worked, shouldn't have made sense, but did anyway. They sat on those steps until the stars faded and dawn started coloring the eastern sky. Sat there making plans for a future neither of them had expected to have. A wedding in the new schoolhouse. A life together on Cole's ranch. Maybe children someday, if they were lucky. Maybe just the satisfaction of building something good in a hard place. When they finally stood to leave, Evelyn took one last look at the school. The stone walls glowed in the early morning light, solid and permanent. A fortress of hope in a place that specialized in crushing it. "We did good work here," she said. "We did," Cole agreed. "Now, let's go home and do some more." They walked toward his ranch hand in hand, and behind them, the schoolhouse stood watch over a town that had learned to fight for itself. A town that had been dying a year ago and was now very much alive. All because a lost widow had stumbled out of the desert and a broken rancher had decided to help her find her way home. They were married on a Saturday in September when the heat had finally broken and the desert didn't feel quite so intent on killing everything that breathed. The ceremony happened in the new schoolhouse, which seemed appropriate given that it was the building that had brought them together in the first place. Margaret Hayes had decorated it with wildflowers gathered from the hills, and someone had borrowed a fiddle player from 3 towns over. It wasn't fancy. The frontier didn't do fancy. But it was real, and that mattered more. Evelyn wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Tom's wife had donated. Nothing white, nothing elaborate, just practical cotton dyed a soft blue that matched the autumn sky. Cole wore his best shirt, which meant the one without any holes, and he'd actually trimmed his beard for the occasion. They stood in front of the whole town and made promises they both intended to keep. The thing nobody told you about marriage, Evelyn would later reflect, was how ordinary it became. How the big romantic gesture gave way to daily routines, small arguments about stupid things, and the grinding work of actually building a life with another person. It wasn't bad. It was just real in ways that stories never captured. Cole left his clothes on the floor. Evelyn talked too much before coffee. They disagreed about how to run the ranch, when to plant, whether they needed another horse. Small things that felt enormous when you were tired and frustrated and wondering if you'd made a mistake. But then there were moments that made it all worthwhile. Cole teaching her to ride properly, his patience endless, even when she fell off for the 3rd time. Evelyn reading to him in the evenings, watching his face soften as he listened to stories about places neither of them would ever visit. The quiet comfort of waking up next to someone who'd seen you at your worst and chosen to stay anyway. They made it work because they both understood something important about love on the frontier. It wasn't about passion or romance or grand declarations. It was about showing up every day and choosing to build something together, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The school continued to grow. By the end of the first year, they had 70 students and needed to hire 2 more teachers. Evelyn had become less of a teacher and more of an administrator, handling enrollment, coordinating curriculum, managing the growing budget as more families moved to Dry Creek, specifically for the education. The transformation of the town happened gradually, then all at once. The railroad deal that Granger had corrupted got renegotiated fairly, with the town council ensuring local landowners got proper compensation. The rail line came through in the spring of 1876, and suddenly Dry Creek wasn't isolated anymore. Supplies arrived more regularly. Markets opened up for ranchers to sell their cattle and crops. New businesses appeared almost overnight. Tom Wheeler built a proper blacksmith shop, bigger than his original. Margaret expanded the boarding house to accommodate the influx of workers and settlers. Frank Miller started a cattle cooperative that helped smaller ranchers compete with larger operations. The general store got competition from 2 new merchants, which drove prices down and quality up. Within 2 years, Dry Creek looked nothing like the dying town Evelyn had first seen. Main Street was paved, buildings were painted. There was a proper church, a doctor's office, even a newspaper that published weekly and actually had news worth printing. But success brought new problems that nobody had anticipated. The first disagreement erupted in a town council meeting in late 1876. A developer from back east wanted to buy a large tract of land to build what he called a modern residential community for wealthy settlers looking to escape eastern cities. He offered money that would transform the town's finances overnight. "We should take it," Davies argued. "That kind of money means proper roads, a real hospital, maybe even a telegraph line." "It also means pricing out the families who built this place," Cole countered. "You let wealthy outsiders buy up the land, and suddenly nobody who actually works for a living can afford to stay here. So we turn down progress because we're afraid of change? We turn down exploitation dressed up as progress. There's a difference." The argument went back and forth for 3 hours. Evelyn sat in the back, listening, watching the town wrestle with what it wanted to become. They'd fought so hard to survive that nobody had stopped to think about what they were surviving for. In the end, they voted no. It was close, 8-7, but it held. The developer left angry, threatening that Dry Creek would regret passing on such an opportunity. Cole came home that night looking exhausted. "Think we made the right choice?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know. Maybe we just delayed the inevitable. Towns either grow or they die. We can't stay small forever. But we can control how we grow, make sure it happens in ways that don't destroy what we built. Can we, though? Or are we just fooling ourselves that we have that kind of control?" It was a fair question, and Evelyn didn't have a good answer. They'd beaten Granger, survived the fire, built the school, and turned Dry Creek into something worth saving. But that didn't mean they'd figured out how to navigate every challenge the future would throw at them. The second problem came from an unexpected direction. In early 1877, the territorial government announced plans to create a formal school district that would standardize curriculum and require certified teachers. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it meant Evelyn and her teachers would need credentials they didn't have, following rules written by people who'd never set foot in a frontier classroom. "They want us to teach from approved textbooks," Evelyn told Cole one night. "Books that don't mention anything west of the Mississippi. They want standardized testing that assumes all children have the same resources and preparation. They want us to stop teaching practical skills like farming and ranching because those aren't academic subjects. So don't comply. If we don't comply, they shut us down, pull our funding, maybe even take the building." "Let them try. We built that school. It's ours." "Not legally. Legally, it's owned by the school district now. We signed those papers to get the funding, remember?" Cole swore. They'd been so focused on getting money to operate that they hadn't thought through the strings attached to it. A mistake, a stupid one. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We compromise. We teach their curriculum during the day and offer evening classes for the practical skills. We get the certifications they want, even if it means I have to travel to the territorial capital for testing. We play their game while keeping what makes our school actually useful. That's going to be exhausting. Everything worth doing is exhausting." It was her new philosophy, born from years of fighting battles that never quite ended. The frontier didn't give you clean victories. It gave you temporary wins that required constant maintenance, like a garden that needed weeding every day, or it would be overtaken by things trying to destroy what you'd planted. Evelyn got her teaching certification in the summer of 1877. It required a month away from Dry Creek, staying in a boarding house in the capital city, while she took exams written by people who thought frontier education was a charitable endeavor rather than a necessity. She passed, barely, because the tests were designed for a different kind of teaching than what actually worked in places like Dry Creek. When she got back, Cole picked her up from the train station. She looked thinner, tired, older somehow. "How was it?" he asked. "Terrible, demeaning, necessary." "You going to make the others do it?" "Yes, because if we don't play by their rules, they'll replace us with teachers who will. Teachers who don't understand this place or these children." They rode back to the ranch in silence. Evelyn stared out at the desert that had nearly killed her 4 years ago and wondered if she'd changed it or if it had changed her. Probably both. That's how survival worked. You adapted or you died, and adaptation meant becoming someone your former self might not recognize. That night, Lying in bed, Cole asked the question they'd both been avoiding. Do you regret it? Coming here? Staying? Evelyn thought about it, really thought, instead of giving the easy answer. Sometimes. When things are hard and I'm tired and it feels like we're just trading one fight for another, then I think about going back east and living some quiet, safe life, and I realize that would kill me faster than anything out here ever could. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have. I don't regret it because I don't know who I'd be if I'd made different choices. And whoever that person would be, I'm not sure I'd like her as much as I like who I've become. Cole pulled her closer. I like who you've become too. Even when I'm stubborn and difficult? Especially then. They fell asleep tangled together, and Evelyn dreamed about the desert. Not the hostile, deadly place she'd first encountered, but something more complex. A place that could kill you or transform you, depending on what you brought to it. The years that followed blurred together in the way that life does when you're busy living it, instead of just surviving it. The school kept growing. By 1880, they had 120 students, 6 teachers, and a reputation that drew families from across the territory. The stone building Evelyn had insisted on proved its worth repeatedly, surviving storms, fires in neighboring buildings, and even an earthquake that damaged half the town but left the school untouched. Evelyn and Cole never had children of their own. They tried, but it didn't happen, and eventually they stopped trying and accepted that their legacy would be built differently. The school became their child in a way, something they'd created together, nurtured through difficult years, and watched grow into something neither of them could have imagined alone. Cole expanded the ranch with help from former students who'd grown into capable ranch hands. He hired men other ranchers wouldn't touch, former criminals trying to start over, drifters with nowhere else to go, anyone willing to work hard and be treated fairly. Some failed. Some stole from him. But enough succeeded that his reputation grew as a man who gave second chances when most people only gave first ones. Margaret Hayes retired from running the boarding house in 1881 and spent her remaining years teaching older students how to keep accounts and run businesses. She died in 1883, peacefully in her sleep, and Evelyn spoke at her funeral about what it meant to be the kind of person who built community instead of just living in one. Tom Wheeler's blacksmith shop became the largest in the territory, and his sons took over the business when he got too old to swing a hammer. Frank Miller's cattle cooperative became a model copied by neighboring towns. Davies, who'd argued for selling out to the developer, eventually admitted Cole had been right and became one of the council's strongest advocates for controlled growth. Dry Creek grew, but it grew carefully, with arguments and debates and occasional mistakes, but always with the understanding that growth for its own sake wasn't worth destroying what made the place worth living in. In 1885, a journalist from a national magazine came through, writing a story about successful frontier settlements. He interviewed Evelyn, asking her what made Dry Creek different. I don't know that we are different, she said. We just decided we were worth saving, and then we did the work to make that true. But there must be something special, some quality that separates successful towns from failed ones. Evelyn thought about that, thought about everything they'd survived and built and fought for. I think the difference is that we stopped waiting for someone else to save us. We had a man who tried to control everything, and after he was gone, we realized nobody was coming to fix our problems or build our future. So we did it ourselves. And we kept doing it, even when it was hard, even when we failed sometimes, even when the solutions weren't perfect. That's it? Just persistence? That's never just anything. Persistence is the hardest thing there is. Giving up is easy. Quitting is easy. Deciding every day to keep building something, to keep trying, to keep believing it matters. That's the hard part. That's what makes the difference. The journalist wrote it down, and when his article was published 3 months later, it called Dry Creek a testament to American resilience and self-determination. Evelyn thought that was overstating things, but Cole kept the article anyway, framed it, and hung it in their kitchen. Why? She asked. Because it's proof, he said, that what we built mattered enough that someone noticed. You need proof of that? Sometimes, when things are hard and it feels like we're just spinning our wheels. Yeah, sometimes I need proof that it wasn't all for nothing. Evelyn understood that. Some days she needed proof too. By 1890, Evelyn was in her mid-40s and Cole was pushing 50. They'd both earned their gray hair and the lines around their eyes. The school had become a permanent institution, training hundreds of children who went on to become ranchers, business owners, teachers themselves. Some left Dry Creek for opportunities elsewhere. Others stayed and built lives in the town that had educated them. One spring afternoon, Evelyn was walking through town when she saw a young woman standing in front of the schoolhouse. She looked lost, frightened, dusty from travel. She reminded Evelyn of someone, though it took a moment to place it. Then she realized. The woman reminded her of herself 16 years ago, stumbling out of the desert with nothing but a worthless land deed and desperation. "You all right?" Evelyn asked. The woman jumped, startled. "I'm sorry, I heard there was a school here. A good one. I'm a teacher, or I was, back in Ohio, but I lost my position, and I thought maybe if I came west I could—" She stopped, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear all this. What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." Evelyn felt something catch in her chest. Sarah. The same name as Cole's first wife. The universe had a strange sense of humor sometimes. "Come with me, Sarah. Let's get you some water and talk about what you're looking for." They sat in Margaret's old boarding house, now run by Margaret's daughter, and Evelyn listened to Sarah's story. It was different from her own in the details, but similar in the shape. A woman running from failure, looking for a second chance, hoping the frontier might offer something she couldn't find anywhere else. "We could use another teacher," Evelyn said when Sarah finished. "If you're interested. Pay isn't great. The work is hard. Some of these children have never been in a classroom before, but if you're willing to put in the effort, we'll train you and give you a chance to prove yourself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You do that? You don't even know me. Someone gave me a chance when I needed one. Seems only fair to pass it along." Sarah took the job. She struggled at first, overwhelmed by frontier children who were rougher and more independent than what she was used to. But she learned, adapted, eventually became one of their best teachers. Years later, she married Tom Wheeler's youngest son and had 3 children of her own, all of whom went through the school their mother had once desperately needed. Cole found Evelyn that evening sitting on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and red. "You all right?" he asked. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how we got here. About all the choices and accidents and moments that had to happen exactly right for any of this to exist." She gestured toward the town in the distance. "About how fragile it all is. How easily it could have gone differently." Cole sat beside her. "But it didn't. It went this way. We're here. The school's here. The town's here. That counts for something. Does it? In 100 years, will anyone remember us? Will anyone know what we built or why it mattered? I don't know. Probably not. But that's not why we built it. Then why did we build it?" Cole considered that. Because it needed building. Because children needed educating. Because a town needed saving. Because we needed something to believe in that wasn't just survival. He took her hand. Because you walked out of that desert and decided you weren't done building things yet. And because I decided to help instead of letting you die alone. You make it sound simple. It was simple. It was everything after that was complicated. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the desert transformed from hostile to beautiful in the way it did every night. Somewhere in town, children were doing homework by lamplight, learning things that would change their lives. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner in homes they owned instead of rented. Somewhere, someone was making plans for a future that included Dry Creek instead of escape from it. All because 2 broken people had collided in the worst place at the worst time and decided to build something good anyway. "Do you think we made a difference?" Evelyn asked quietly. "I think we made the only difference that matters. We showed up. We did the work. We didn't quit when it got hard." Cole squeezed her hand. "That's all anyone can do. The rest is just hoping it's enough." Evelyn leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of someone who'd been beside her through everything. It was enough. It is enough. They stayed on that porch until the stars came out. 2 people who'd survived the frontier by refusing to let it make them smaller. 2 people who'd learned that hope wasn't something you found. It was something you built, piece by piece, day by day, even when you weren't sure it would matter. And in the end, maybe that was the only lesson worth teaching. That survival wasn't enough. That building something good in a hard place was what gave life meaning. That love wasn't about grand gestures, but about showing up every day and choosing each other again. That a widow lost in the desert and a rancher who'd given up on hope could find each other and create something that outlasted them both. Years later, long after both of them were gone, travelers passing through Dry Creek would still tell the story. About the school built from stone that wouldn't burn, about the town that refused to die, about the woman who walked out of Red Canyon more dead than alive, and the man who helped her find her way home. The details changed over time, the way stories always do, but the heart of it remained true, that ordinary people doing extraordinary things out of necessity could transform not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. That sometimes the most powerful act of defiance was simply refusing to give up. That hope, real hope, wasn't naive or foolish, but the hardest, bravest thing you could choose. And that in a place designed to destroy dreams, the greatest rebellion was to build them anyway.